If you love liberty, declare your independence by signing the Shire Society Declaration at shiresociety.com.
Okay, it is time for our next panel, and I'm really looking forward to what these ladies have to say about social media and influencers and promoting yourself and promoting a message. So please help me welcome Naomi Brockwell, Desiree, Lynn Ulbricht, and Carla Garrick.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm pretty excited about this panel because these are three women on this panel that are very inspiring to me just from what they've achieved in terms of communicating messages that I think are tremendously important. So let me go ahead and introduce them, and then we'll move on to why communication is incredibly important and what we can learn from what they've achieved. So we've got Carla Garrick on the end. She is President Emeritus of the Free State Project and also Queen Quill. Please give her a round of applause. We have Lynn Ulbricht. She's a political activist. You all probably know and adore her from what she's done and the tremendously important things that she's fighting for at the moment. She is the CEO of freeross.org. If you haven't signed both petitions, please do. And also give her a round of applause. And we have Desiree Campbell. She is a very well-known influencer on YouTube. She has a show called Just Thinking Out Loud, another show called Crypto Ramble. She has a lot of stories to tell about her fight against being deplatformed and all kinds of things. Please give her a big welcome to the stage. So I want to start off by talking about the importance of communication and how the libertarian movement lacks severely in this way, I think. Like you can probably learn a lot of things from the people on this stage about how to engage people with these ideas. They're not ideas that people are used to. Let's be honest, these ideas are not brought up in the schooling system. These ideas are not discussed in the media. So when people are confronted with ideas that they're just not acquainted with, you immediately get hostility, you get immediate dismissal on these, and it can be really, really difficult to break through that. So we're going to talk about each individual case here. But why it's important is because I think a lot of people in this movement, they tend to miss half the battle. They think that, well, the facts are on our side. We have all the data points, and that's going to lead us to succeed. We just have to explain rationally why this is factually accurate, and people will just fall to us like fresh fruit from the vine. And it just doesn't work like that, you know? And I think that sometimes, I'm not sure if this has been your experience, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, but my experience has been that people just, they can be a little bit conceited when they're talking with people because they feel the facts are on their side. And rather than trying to understand their audience and trying to understand the values of that person, they instead want to project their own values and try to convince them why these values are superior. I think that that's a big mistake. You're stripping away people's identity, and that's the worst way to have an argument. So that's been my experience. I think that understanding the audience is key. So let's start off with that and just talk about like each, maybe get an overview of the different battles that each of you have been fighting, and how you believe that audience, like understanding that audience is key and what people can learn. What are some tips you have for kind of getting an overview of what your audience is after? How do you learn about their value system? How do you figure out what's important to them so that you can effectively communicate your message? So, Carl, you want to start?
I really don't, but I'll give it a shot. I mean, I think the first thing, just in terms of general messaging for libertarians, and it's a challenge for all of us because we're smart people for the most part, and we love being the smartest person in the room. You know what the other person in the room doesn't like is either if they think they're the smartest person in the room or they feel like they're being talked to, right? So in terms of just general messaging, I think keeping your audience in mind and then actually employing empathetic tools, kind of putting yourself in that person's shoes is probably the most persuasive way I have found to message. In particular in the work I do, because I do a lot of police accountability work, and that is a delicate dance, right? Because it's a subject matter that's pretty much fraught with slogans on both sides. By way of example, I'll give a brief little scenario. Back in 2013, probably at Liberty Forum here in New Hampshire, we did a 420 smokeout, and it was a spring day. It was incredibly beautifully warm, and there were probably 70 or 80 of us who went to the town square in Nashua and had a smokeout. Unbeknownst to us, some locals joined in. It was a really fun vibe. There were 2 black children at the smokeout. And the next second, we see no one's being harassed. A narc pulls his badge out of his shirt and literally arrests only 1 black person among 70 people who are all smoking weed. And we were like, what is happening? So, being activists, everyone went up and, people sat in front of the car. But for a millisecond, a F the police vibe started and people started chanting. And I saw, oh my goodness, this is going to go in a really bad direction right now. And so I was like, no, let's just and sort of de-escalated it in that situation. So in terms of just how, we approach stuff, certainly with the police accountability for me, it's a lot of times stay on message. Don't maybe tell them exactly how you think. There are ways to persuasively talk about these issues with both facts, but then also empathetic stories. And maybe just as a universal idea, one of the things I found quite successfully in our community is and I would love to see someone make this video series, so if you're interested in something like this, talk to me. But to make a show that's literally like, how did the state hurt you? Show me on this doll where the state hurt you. Because everyone has a story. That is really oftentimes people's into liberty, is something happened to them or a family member, as with Lynn, I think. All right, I'm gonna hand that off to you.
Well, it's so unlikely that I'd be on this panel because when Ross was arrested, I'd never been on social media. And I only had gotten a smartphone as a hand-me-down for my daughter 2 weeks before. So I was propelled into this whole strange world. And, honestly, it is so important, as everyone here knows. I mean, if it weren't for the internet and social media, I couldn't have gotten as far as I have in trying to free Ross. Of course, if it weren't for the internet, I wouldn't having to be trying to free Ross. So it's kind of, but in any case, yes, it's been necessary. And to learn, it's been a steep learning curve for me. I mean, it's not a natural thing. I feel like learning technology for someone my age is like learning a foreign language as an adult. I don't expect to ever be as good and fluent as you all, or many of you. But I have learned a lot. And actually, my first Porcfest, I talked to Franz, I don't know if he's here. There he is, and Leslie, and they both gave me really good input about just tips and things, and just talked to me about it. And one of the things Leslie said that really stuck with me was, it's like a conversation. That's an actual person on the other end. Because I was really shy about it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna write this thing, and then it's never gonna die, and it's gonna come back and haunt me, and that still comes up. But, I've gotten much more comfortable. And I think that that's a big part of it. It's a conversation. And, you can use humor, or you can use sarcasm, and I find that actually is very popular. And, just, of course, memes, or anything that's, kind of fun, I think is very good, especially with a topic like mine, which is usually either criminal justice reform, sentencing reform, horrible stories, Ross's story. It's kind of heavy. But just trying to keep it interesting and somewhat entertaining and alive. And that's a big part of my goal, is to not have Ross forgotten, to keep him alive in people's minds. And it's tough. So I think social media is a big part of it. Of course, there's all these rules, don't do this and at that. And I'm like, oh God, it's like, and yeah. And actually, it was Roger Ver who said, hey, Lynn, you need to use hashtags. You know what a hashtag is? And you need to put a little at, and that'll get somebody's attention. And I'm like, oh, but should I? Because maybe that'll impose on them, and I don't know. I mean, seriously, it's like I have to overcome all these things. But, you know, you get used to it and just keep going. And for me, it's not like, oh, I can't stay away from my phone. It's like, oh my God, I've got to do this now. So I have to overcome this natural hesitance to do it, but I do. And sometimes it's really fun, and then I get totally into it. And I think that flow. So you probably have a lot more. Oh, and by the way, it's really sad when I've been working for 5 years to get a certain number of followers, and your son, my son, tweets like 10 times and surpasses me by far. I'm like, you know, but I'm happy about it. But I mean, okay, whatever.
I like this rivalry between mother and son.
Hi. So first of all, I'd like to clarify that I don't actually consider myself to be a libertarian, even though a lot of my values do overlap with what I would consider foundational principles of the libertarian movement as I understand them. I have 2 channels, one that's called Just Thinking Out Loud. I spoke a little bit about being censored by YouTube on that, and then also being banned outright by PayPal twice. Actually, and I speak about topics that I think are sensitive social topics. And I would recommend for anyone out there who has a message to get out to focus on why you're doing it, and then everything else will sort of fall into place. Before I got into talking about social issues, I actually was into art, and that's how I started making videos. And I remember, I'm from Jamaica, and there was a woman who ran an organization called Jamaicans for Justice. And it's actually about police brutality in Jamaica, which I don't really talk about anymore. But I remember asking her, if there's something that you really want to talk about and you're worried about someone coming after you. This was before I had really gotten into politics in America. So I was thinking more in the context of Jamaica and the government being corrupt over there. I said, what do you do? Because I'm worried about like my family, if they were to come after them for some reason. And she said that you need to build an audience so that they can help you and help your voice be heard in the future. I didn't know if that would be relevant to me over time, but it eventually has become relevant. So I would say it's very important to get people on your side, and then maybe afterwards start going after it, because then you have people who can lift you up. In my particular case, where I was banned by PayPal, I was retweeted by some very famous people on Twitter. And so if I didn't have just a smaller following, maybe they wouldn't have taken me seriously. So that's one thing that I would recommend for getting your message out there. Why was I banned? Well, I had a talk about it, but I was never told why I was banned. So I can't tell you that I was told that I violated their acceptable use policy. I talk about how much I don't like identity politics a lot, but I talk about many different topics. I recently spoke about comparing arguments for being pro-life and being vegan, because I think they're similar, even though usually those demographics don't overlap. I talked about circumcision recently. I actually do not like Black Lives Matter as a movement, and I talk about that a bit way in the past, but I can only grasp at straws as to why I was actually banned. No one actually told me. So I can't answer your question directly. So another thing I would say is that when you try to persuade people, there are different ways that you can go about it. You can use intellect and reasoning, and you can also use experts, like if you come off as an expert, authority. You could also use humor to try and make it so that even if we're talking about something super serious, I'm not good at the humor thing actually, but even if you're talking about something serious, because you present it in a way that's not threatening, it's easier for them to take it in. So I would recommend also aesthetics. You could try and focus on your presentation. I would recommend combining different aspects so that you're not maybe good and strong in one point and then not so much in the other. So I think that's all I have for now, as to how to get a message out there.
So I wanted to build more on what Desiree was saying, and also bring it back to you, Lynn, because one of the things I've noticed that you do tremendously well is you make it personal. That's something that libertarians generally don't. We're really great with statistics. We can say 1.5 million people have this going on, and the problem is that people have an inability to grasp large numbers. It doesn't connect with them. It sounds impressive. You're using a large number, but it's actually not useful. What you do is you make it tremendously personal. you're actually representing the entire justice system. You're actually talking about criminal justice reform. You're talking about reforming the war on drugs, getting rid of that. You're talking about a giant thing that's affecting millions of people. But you actually don't focus on that, and that's why I think you're so powerful, because you're telling the story of Ross. You're talking about the injustice there that he's suffering. Ross is providing, I mean, he's humanizing himself all the time by having a Twitter account where he's, relating over the phone the tweets he wants to tweet because he's not allowed to use a computer. That is a way to connect with people that I think people could really learn from. So talk about that process and what you've done with Free Ross in order to just connect people more with his individual story and how you found that to be a powerful tool.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Stalin said it. He said something like, 1 million people are a statistic, but you know about one individual story and you care. And that's just the way we are. You can relate to that. Otherwise, it's numbers. It's the prison numbers. You can think, oh, that's horrible, millions of people. But when you know the story of Ross, or his friend Tony, who's in prison in Colorado where marijuana is legal for life for marijuana, and you hear the different stories of the families, or the mother who was saying, before this happened to our family, all my kids had straight A's, and now our family's falling apart. It is personal. It's individual people, and so yes, Ross is kind of the face of that in my efforts, and we both hope that it can shine a light on what's going on in a personal way. And I was at Freedom Fest, and there was a panel, and Mike Lee, the senator, was one of the people, and I got up and I said, well, what can I do? And he said, well, you're credible, and Congress needs to see your face, because to Congress, it's just statistics. They don't care. They need to see your face and need to hear your voice. And many people have said to me, the reason I got involved was because I met you, and of course, if I'm real, Ross is real, and it makes all the difference. And so using social media for that, it's incredibly powerful, as we all know. It's just become so powerful, and it's free, and it's available, and I should be a lot better at it. I was going to attend this panel to learn some things, and then I found out I was actually on the panel. So, but again, it's people. It's just people, and some of them are very nasty people. We're going to
never ever read the comments. People say that to you as a joke, but then at some stage you start to realize perhaps that is a good strategy for
you sit
life.
there reading at 12 o'clock at night, like regretting your life choices.
And I just want to add to that, this panel talks about influencers, and from a social media standpoint, I do a lot of behind the scenes work. So having worked on the Free State Project social media campaigns for a long time, to some extent, we wouldn't be around without something like Facebook, right? For us, a huge tipping point was when we were able to easily and cheaply spread the message and get those, last 10,000 signers. It took us 10 years, 11 years, 12 years to get like the first 10,000, but it only took us 2 or 3 years to get the last 5. And that was because we could target marketing. We tried everything. We did A/B testing, what worked, what didn't work. I had mentioned yesterday, one of my favorite categories of people were Ron Paul supporters plus George Carlin. And I was like, that's gonna give you a good time. So, and so we would play around with those kinds of ideas. So, sometimes the influence is behind the scenes, but, also powerful and necessary.
I just wanted to add about the comments. I would actually recommend reading the comments, because then you become sort of immune to them over time. But they will bother you if they're super harsh at first, but you can't be continually getting a negative message and at some point not be like, I just don't care anymore.
And that really is, I think, part of, certainly for me, my personal growth on this journey. And I should mention, on Monday, I launched my own branded website, carlagerrick.com, because I'm tired of doing everything behind the scenes. I want to get some kudos for my work. It's called Human Action, and I'm all in. But it really is also a journey of personal growth. Living your life in the public is not easy. And it's not easy for people. I mean, maybe it's easy for, narcissistic sociopaths, but for the rest of us, it's actually quite uncomfortable. So you have to grow into it. And I agree with you. Yes, at first, read those comments because you have to have a thick skin. This is not an easy game. And you have to get over that and just it's not really about you, although it always is because you're doing it. But, and just push forward, and that is how we change the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do develop certain thick skin. But I have a question, actually. I go back and forth between somebody says something like, oh, didn't Ross kill people? Oh, okay, we gotta do this again.
And actually, can I just interject there? Because I'm there, generally I'm posting things about Ross and people are immediately responding, saying like, he's a murderer. And I'm about to I have to calm myself down, and I'm about to get on there, doing all the things I'm gonna tell you not to do. And then I see him respond. She's like, well, actually, she just handles in the most diplomatic, understanding way because she understands that her audience has been told a certain amount of things. She understands the media has been smearing this for a really long time. She gets who she's talking to and she's not exasperated. I just want to give you a hat tip because I notice that every time you do it and I'm just wow, that's how you do it, sorry.
Well, it's okay. Thank you. Sometimes I'm just well, God, even the government doesn't say that. Where'd you get, what's your source? Or I'll give them a link to a very well footnoted thing about all the false things. But then I'm torn because then people say, oh, just don't feed the trolls, right? Don't do it. So can you use them as a vehicle and a platform to get that answer out because it's in everybody's head or a lot of people's minds? Or do you ignore them? And a lot of these people have 2 followers and stuff like that. I mean, I don't even know if they're being paid to do this or whatever, but I'd like your opinions because I don't.
I mean, I would definitely say one trick I learned is it's really good to have your stock answers, right? And then when there is a negative thing like that, I will generally respond to the first one and then, either ignore the rest or just say see above, but make sure that you have a pithy, good answer, which possibly might even hit all the emotion, the data, the expert, kind of all of that in a little package. And that's the mature way to do it. When I get attacked for being a free stater when I run for state senate, and it seemed like it was a concerted strategy, and I wouldn't be surprised even on your posts, that there are people and they are basically either paid to needle you or paid to insert these things. I mean, I think there is conscious psyops on some of this. But people would post and they would immediately say, aren't you a free stater? And in 2016, I would either get flustered or I wouldn't know, and now I just post and I say, yeah, so what? We're awesome. What do they do? Now they can't say anything. I mean, they keep repeating it. And I did that with several, and it was usually middle-aged ladies, and I was and they stopped. They did it 10 times, I hit back, and they just stopped doing it.
I would also say don't be discouraged whenever you're getting a negative response to what you're saying, because you can see someone who say in a room of people who don't agree with them and it seems as if nobody's agreeing with them, but there are other people who are watching and who are paying attention, and you're going to attract the kind of people who are interested in your message, even if the direct feedback you're getting seems super negative. So just keep going.
So you agree with answering these people?
I do, and I also agree with being diplomatic and not doing whatever Naomi was going to say you shouldn't do that she's done.
Learn from my mistakes. In answer to your question, I would agree with Desiree. I think that you're arguing for the people who are watching, who, the type of person who's going to engage you with a nasty comment, they won't necessarily come to your side, even with the best response possible. But if someone had heard, that rumor as well, and they're like, yeah, what about that? And you explain it in a very clear way, you may have just turned 10 people onto your side. It's so important that you handle yourselves well when you're speaking in public and just not allow your emotion to overrun you. It's just the most important thing that you can do. And I know that we get so frustrated because, we've been dealing with these ideas for years and years and years, and we're getting the same questions. And as you said, in the same post, you get 10 different people asking the exact same thing, and it's do you respond to all of them by the end? Are you just fucking read my first answer? Are you an idiot? Don't do that. That's not a good thing to do. Respond to them, engage them. Maybe they'll have a different response that, will take you in a different direction, that will give you a different perspective that you can then explain. Like, these are all messaging tools. If you're a public figure and you're using these platforms to communicate with people, communicate ideas, take every possible, leverage every advantage that you have. If someone gives you an in to delve into something new in a different perspective, take it. Explain it rationally. Show these people another side of things that could potentially convince them.
Well, I can say that I have convinced people. They said, okay, I'll look at it, I'll consider, The other thing is now there's lots of other people who jump in on my behalf or on Ross's behalf, and they handle it. And that's been great.
And that it's really something you want to build, right? Because that is, as your brand scales, it's very hard. In fact, it made me think, I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to answer every comment, but it's like, everything's a time benefit analysis, right? So if you're doing a million things, that's hard. But I will answer the questions at carlagarrick.com. But yeah, so there is really that idea, right, of trying to engage people. But if you can build your own little internet army to help with that, that's gold, right? Because then that also means that, people have your back. And something as simple as sharing and liking and commenting on posts. I try, it's actually, it's written down on my goals, is every time I see something, and it's marked to see them first, but I don't think it really comes that way on Facebook anymore. But if I see something from Free Ross, I try to comment, I try to share. If you send him mail, old-fashioned mail, which he appreciates in prison, take a photo, post the address, share that on Instagram, other people see it. That is how we keep people engaged and reminded about these kinds of things.
Thanks for doing that. Yeah, join my army, would you? That'd be great. Please, come on.
I would say that that's such an amazing point. So like the first precept I would say to take away, make it personal. That's what Hollywood does. They're amazing at it. The left tells incredible stories. Every film that has built a social movement has been a story about an individual fighting against the odds, fighting against, something that was more powerful of them. And they've taught people how, sometimes, you've got to fight. And like you build entire movements just from telling an individual story. They don't tell these stories, like even Chernobyl. Who watched Chernobyl? Yep. Like they took an entire industry of scientists and condensed it into one single female character to tell that story. Yeah, because that's how you tell a story. That's how you connect with people. It was a really well done series, I think. So make it personal. That's just so important. Build an army. Wow, if you're going to be a public...
But not a militia.
If you're going to be a public person, it's about showing how you have value for the community as well. It's not just supporting the things that you agree with, like Free Ross. I'm always there trying to build that as well, and acting on your behalf whenever I can, and other things as well. Also, connect with your adversaries. I've had a lot of people who started out as haters on my channel. Just by engaging them and being civil, they're not used to this. They're used to writing these angry comments and having people be angry back, and it fuels them and it makes them angry, and they'll go do it to someone else. Like, I've engaged with people before and just had good conversations and just try to understand them, or joked or try to bring it down. And it's amazing how often that works. I had one guy who I met at a conference, and we were chatting. And I was like, what's your handle? I'll follow you. And he kind of went a little silent, and he's like, I'm embarrassed to tell you. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, I unfollowed you and said some really nasty things. And I kind of feel bad about it now that I'm talking with you. I'm like, really? So I managed to convince him to tell who it was. And he did say some nasty things to me. But it's like, we've become good friends since then. I've actually interviewed him on my show. I'm not going to tell you who it is. But it's amazing that just connecting with someone, and if they have something nasty to say, just like as you said, find a way to find humor in it, try to find a way to like, break down their defenses, and you may end up finding a good ally. If you've believed in someone enough to like see their point of view, understand where they're coming from, they could become one of your truest supporters in the future. So don't underestimate the power of that. So like build an army would be the second one. Desiree brought up something really important, which is the third one I want to talk about, and it's about connecting first with people and trying to find a way to not be threatening. I think that that's so important, and I wanted to get your perspective on this. Like my perspective on this is that there's so much overlap in what we all believe. The liberals and libertarians, there's huge overlap there. Conservatives and libertarians, there's huge overlap there. I mean, I think the best way to communicate is trying to find a way first, before you fight them, find a way to say, okay, well, where do we agree? Understand where they're coming from, befriend them, be someone that they might potentially listen to, and then, maybe inspire them, maybe enlighten them, broaden their horizons. I just think it's such a better way to go, but I would love your thoughts.
Well, my dad was a diplomat, and he worked for the apartheid South African regime. So he was not very popular. And we were placed in places overseas. And I mean, in fact, like I was 10 years old and a lady in Sweden spat in my face because I was a white little girl from South Africa. And, so with that diplomacy, I think an approach we should think about in terms of messaging is to really think about how, to see our mission as a diplomatic mission, right? Because for the voluntarists or anarchists in the room, we believe in persuasion, so we don't believe in force. We're not gonna make anyone do anything. So we have to convince them, right? So instead of being like, I'm gonna convince you because I'm right, if you look at it more as a diplomatic mission, meaning find the common ground, kind of go, what can I do for this person? Maybe throw an awesome party. I will say this, under the South African regime, we have very good wine in South Africa, and everyone in the diplomatic corps would go to their parties because they had the best wine and they just kept pouring. And that's how they, made friends, and you can change things. I mean, South Africa, to its credit, when Nelson Mandela, who I did vote for, which apparently makes Chris Gantwell very, very angry, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go.
Lynn.
Well, I just was going to say that this is something I learned from Ross. He said he engages in dialogue, asks questions, listens to them, then presents his side, and doesn't get into battles with people. And it's quite persuasive. So I agree. People are just going to put up their defenses, and you're not going to get anywhere. Now, some people don't want to even do that, and so move on. If you're not going to change somebody or get anywhere, after a while, what's the point? Move on to somebody who you can open their mind. But a lot of times it comes down to respecting that other person, and having them feel that way, and then it's much more effective.
There are people who come on my political YouTube channel specifically because they say they want to hear the other side, and I'm a person that they feel comfortable hearing it from. And I'm very proud of that. And it's my personal mission. It's a bit hard because you get angry at people and you're emotionally attached to the things that you're discussing, or why else would you talk about them? It's hard for me to hold back sometimes, but I think it's really important because of today's political climate to try and foster that kind of environment where people can still talk to each other and it be more of a debate rather than a blood sport, is what they call it, like on YouTube, when people are arguing all the time. So I think it's very important for me personally, it's my mission to create an environment where people can come and hear another side. And I think it's really, really important for today's climate. I'm hoping that eventually people get so burned out from feeling angry at their neighbor all the time and they start looking for something deeper, and then they'll come to a channel like mine.
Yeah, I think That's so wonderful, and you do an amazing job at that. And I think that there's a dehumanizing aspect. Like, sometimes it's easier just to look at the people in our immediate circle, think of them as human, and anyone who disagrees, well, they're an idiot, and they're stupid, and they're nasty, they're malicious. I think that it's far more effective to foster that environment of engagement. Actually understand why they believe the way they do. Honestly, most of these people have gone through their entire life never hearing these ideas before. Like, have some sort of empathy for that, for what that must be like to be living with a blindfold on their entire life, having no idea of what's going on in the world. So have patience if you can. I know it's a hard thing to ask, but have patience so that, maybe you could try to open their eyes and you could improve their lives by showing them some of the things that you've discovered. I think that's so great. And I think Dave Smith put it really well the other day. The way he phrased this, the idea of understanding the overlap with your audience, he said we need to be more right than the right and more left than the left. And I think that's a great way of phrasing it. That's the idea behind that, is understanding your audience, understanding their value system, and choosing that as the point that you're going to go on. If they're a leftist, okay, so what's the overlapping value system? How do I convince them? How do I bring them all the way over to this side using their ideals? I think that that's just such a smart way to go about it. And I think sometimes we tend to, obviously we have our own priorities. We think, what do I find most important? This is the biggest issue. It's not going to be the biggest issue for everyone, right? We can't just presume that someone else is going to be interested in fiscal responsibility because you think it's such an important topic and that's what you're going to harp on. They're like, I don't care. I'm so bored right now in this conversation. But you start engaging them about, something that is they're passionate about, then they start to listen, and then they see you more as an ally than a threat, which is important. The third thing, sorry, did you have something to say? Oh. The third thing that I want to talk about is something I learned from Stossel. So keep it simple. It's so important to keep it simple when you're spreading ideas. And there's a place for long, in-depth discussions about things, and that's wonderful. And you're only going to reach a tiny fraction of the population with things like that. There are very few people in the world who are interested in sitting down for a 1-hour video that goes into the intricacies of blockchain tech. I know, because no one watches those videos. But if you keep it simple, I remember, I'll write some things for John, and I'll be so proud of it. And I'll be like, I really got to the heart of this issue. And this is my, opus. Here you go, John. What do you think? There's nothing wrong he could say about this. And he'll just go through and he'll be like, no. And he'll highlight one sentence. He'll be like, just talk about that one idea. Make it really simple. There are a few reasons why you want to do that. The first reason is because people will just tune out, especially if it's a foreign idea. If it's simple, you have more chance of them actually hearing out the whole idea. If it's complicated, they're just shutting out. You've lost your opportunity immediately. The other thing is if you say too many things, if you have a video that has 17 points in it, it's really difficult for the audience to take anything away from that. It's too much for them. Choose one thing, one very simple thing, and focus on it. For example, you're having a conversation with someone. You're talking to them about all the reasons why you think the state is bad. You tell them, 5 things that they agree with. Then you tell them a 6th thing that they disagree with. The one takeaway from that is that they disagree with you. That's all they're going to remember. And everything else you said, they're going to be discredited. They'll be like, oh yeah, I follow your logic, I follow your logic, I follow your logic. Oh, I disagree here. Therefore, that discredits everything else you said. And you've just lost all the hard work and all the ground you've made. So try to just, don't be trapped when you are in those internet conversations to be like, this reason why it's bad, and also this one, and also this, and did you know about this? Just cut run when you think that you've made some ground, because they may not fully come over to your side, but you may have incrementally brought them over to understanding. I think that's the most important thing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you use that preface, or if maybe you have a different idea, maybe you disagree, but I'd love to hear.
Well, what comes up for me is how complicated Ross's case is. It is so complicated. There's so many aspects to it, so many bad things, and I want to tell them all, And it really, I've tried to just boil it down to double life plus 40 years for a nonviolent first-time offender who's never been charged with hurting anyone. Just wrap your head around that and what the implications of that are. And then we have so I totally agree. But at the same time, we've provided, if people want to dig, we've got plenty of opportunity on our website to dig. And and tried to make it easy for journalists, and we've given them citations and all kinds of stuff in the hopes that they will actually do it and talk about it. But yes, absolutely. And, we all know attention span is so short. You can't,
Although I was interested to learn, I was at a conference and I did not know this, but one of the presenters said that they recommend that you make sure you also have long form, like long over 1,500 word blog posts and stuff. This is not entirely in the realm of just social media, but it is a sort of online activity. And that surprised me because I feel like, we so often hear brevity, shorter, simpler, and all of that. But I think for all of us, in terms of our core issues, you want to think about, is there that long essay, that one that really sort of encapsulates whatever I personally feel about X or Y. I know there are a lot of keto haters. We heard a lot about that at Soapbox Idol. But, I could write a long essay about that, or, sobriety or whatever. And that surprised me because I was like, I wouldn't have thought to go do that. I would have kept everything at 500 and under in terms of words. And so, just to find that balance, I think.
I would recommend having both kinds of content, both long form and short form. There's a term called stock to flow content, and you have stock content that sort of establishes your authority on a topic that people can really go into depth and learn about whatever topic you're talking about. And then you have flow content that it's much shorter and it keeps you engaged with your audience over time. So you can also, when you're, say, responding to a question, refer them to the longer piece that you have if they want to learn more.
That's great. I'm learning a lot here. I need to do more of that content. I think that's great, Carla.
And actually, I had a question, I guess, for all of us in terms of if people have a favorite platform, just by way of example. I have a Twitter account, which I think I hoot-tweeted to my Senate account 4 years ago. I only literally figured out, like, maybe 2 months ago. I was like, have I been tweeting all this time? So Twitter clearly is, I put the twit in Twitter, is not my platform, but I want to develop it. And so I would say for me, like, Facebook has worked really well. It sounds like YouTube over there, but maybe like which one and why, and maybe like a couple of tips for me.
Well, I would say that Twitter is really great for anything controversial because people argue a lot. I'm not trying to promote division, but if crypto is really big on Twitter and political stuff is really big on Twitter because of the kind of content, the kind of the limits that you have. It allows for sort of disses or something like that. It's like it allows for short plays of people establishing dominance almost over like the topic that they're talking about. That sounds really horrible, but we are like social creatures, and there's a reason why Twitter works the way it does. So I'd say for controversial stuff, I would say that. And then for anything more in-depth, I would say like a blog or something people can find over time through like searching for a certain term. And I'm also on YouTube, and I use that for long-form content mostly. In-depth stuff. People also like podcasts a lot when they're trying to learn about a topic. They like, like driving and like listening to something super in-depth. So that's what I would, recommend.
Yeah, I try to support the ecosystem in crypto. There are a ton of like decentralized platforms, alternative media platforms that I love. They all have a very distinct culture. So I'm on BitChute and Minds.com and Memo.cash and Bitbacker and Steemit, and I was on yours until I closed my account because BSV. What else? Like there are so many. Library.io is another interesting one. There are different things, and I think you have to figure out like who your audience is, and that's going to dictate which platforms are going to be most helpful. I agree. Podcast. Quite often people won't want to sit down and watch a video because it's very time consuming. But if they're commuting somewhere, they'll listen to my podcast. So I've seen that audience go right up, especially with the long form ones. It's a lot more popular there. So.
Yeah, I just want to put in a plug that we did that for we put together a thing based on the public record called Railroaded, the targeting and caging of Ross Ulbricht. It's got almost 400 footnotes if you want to sit and read it, and it's backed up. And if I only had the all of the sealed and undisclosed and encrypted stuff the government won't let us see, it would really be amazing. But it's still pretty riveting. But then we made a audio, which is now a podcast. You can search it on, iTunes and all of that. And we put a little video, pictures to go along with it if you want to sit and watch it. And so trying to have all of those different ways, because it's a big hunk of stuff. So, yeah.
And if we're plugging stuff, I have an upcoming podcast starting soon called Told You So. So I apparently do not follow any of our own advice. It's me and Brink Slattery, and I think it's going to be pretty cool and fun. So for people who want to stay up to date on what is happening in the Free State, that's going to be the way to do it.
I also wanted to add that it's a lot harder to censor a podcast because it's a feed and you can access it through various platforms. So it's good to have that going no matter what other platforms that you're using.
And just like diversifying across platforms too, like something like library.io, it's decentralized, that stuff is not coming down.
And it's based in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Nice.
So.
And there are lots of different
Local.
ways that you can, especially if you're worried about deplatforming, just kind of, I would start to build audiences in a lot of these communities. It's been a slow progress for me building my channel in general, but it's really gratifying to see these different communities start to really build up. And that's also assuring, because I know that if something gets shut down, it's no surprise YouTube doesn't like crypto stuff, doesn't like anarchists either. So I feel like I'm destined to be screwed. So that's why I'm kind of safeguarding myself and making sure that people know where to find me if something happens there. So the final thing that I want to talk about, and it goes back to what you were saying, Desiree, is the idea of emotions when we're dealing with topics. And I've heard different accounts on this. I've heard some people say the title of your podcast, some people that I've heard said I actually get convinced if someone's like, you're a fucking idiot, they're like, oh, and sometimes they just get converted when someone's shouting at them for an hour. I think that takes a special type of person, and you probably shouldn't use that anecdote as an example for how you should engage in general. I think that libertarians in particular, we like a good argument and we can appreciate good logic, and so sometimes you can have a roaring debate where you're just going at each other, and at the end you're like, you've made some really good points, But I think that in general, you do have to understand that most people don't like confrontation. Me personally, I'm not a confrontational person at all. And I just, most people, their fight or flight instincts come up, they, start to get emotional. It's not helpful. So I think that the reason why we go straight to emotion is sort of as you said, the passion that we feel that sort of comes into play, but it's also indignation. It's these things shouldn't be happening. You should know about this. I'm angry at you for not knowing about this. You're part of the problem because you don't know about this. You should come over to our side because you're not helping and you're hurting people. And it's that indignation of people not knowing these things. And as I said before, I think we need to have a bit more patience there, because as our emotions escalate, and if we let that enter our minds, we don't think as well. We don't, logically understand our audience as well. We lose the ability to empathize with them. We lose most of the tools in our basket for talking about ideas. So even though sometimes it can feel good to shout at someone and win an argument, and especially if other people are watching, it becomes this sport match, as you said, I won this and all this. But I think that you need to walk there's a balance there, and just realize that you're probably not performing at your best if you're emotional in the argument.
And we're very nice in the podcast. That was just the name we went for. But it's also, and I do think this is something we should exploit more, is history is on our side. We have a lot of historical examples, and I think there are a lot of missed opportunities when things happen in the news, and we can be like, but we literally told you so. So those sort of examples where you see something and you can go, but wait, and maybe it's as I'm older and wiser, and I can be like, but wait, I remember 30 years ago we were, debating this exact thing, and we said at that time this was going to happen, and now it did. So we certainly have a little aspect of that in there, and then we have semi-cooking part called a mousse douche, which is supposed to be funny. If you're a cooking person, you will get the reference. But yes, messaging is always going to be something we should be looking at and thinking about. And I think thinking who your audience is really key.
So there is maybe one more thing that I would like to bring up, and it's the idea, and this is something I personally have come in contact with in the last week, where, because I rail against the state a lot in my show, and someone who was like watches, he's very patriotic, and like he likes the crypto side of things, but his identity is fully tied into his nationality, which is something that I don't experience. And so it's interesting because he was saying, like, you know, why don't you just be nice on your show? Why are you so negative about what's going on? And like, why are you always hating on what the government's doing? Like all this. And actually, that was a good learning point for me as well, because part of me is like, well, I'm not happy with the status quo. Of course, I'm going to critique this. Of course, I want to see change. Of course, they're not doing a good enough job. Of course, we should be fighting this. But you have to realize people's identity, they're tied in with the things that you're fighting. So, you know, if you can find a better way to phrase these things, if you can make them understand that, like, yeah, I totally respect where you're coming from. I understand that you like this and this about your country, you know. What if we could make it even better? You know, what if we could improve on it? Like, get people inspired about change rather than hating on their identity. And again, it's going to change depending on the audience you're with. Some people, that's not going to be the right tactic, but there are some people you're going to be engaging with that their identity is fully tied in with what you're fighting against. So just be aware of that you may be shooting yourself in the foot right off the bat by attacking what they believe in. So,
you know, sometimes I'll get somebody, well, listen, you did the crime, you do the time. And I want to go, oh my God, do you know how many multiple thousands of people are doing excessive sentencing and how it's changed and how it's un-American and how, you know, on and on. And sometimes I'm just too tired. I'm too tired to argue with this person, you know, and I just don't, you know, and sometimes I do, but it's like, good grief. I mean, you know, when you're thrown cliches and people who aren't really thinking it through, I don't know. It's hard to be, oh, I'm really interested in your point of view. So, yeah, I don't know. That's just a comment, but you're right. I mean, it probably doesn't work very well to attack, you know, and get all in that. But sometimes, hey, sometimes being angry is warranted. Sometimes it is something to be angry at. And, you know, I spoke yesterday with Roz was talking about the will to fight. You know, sometimes you got to fight. You know?
That's a great point, and I have a question maybe for you guys about this. Is that line between, like, what do you fight out against? What do you show your passion about in order to inspire other people? And what do you, you know, like picking your battles? It's the idea, like, I think of Schindler's List, right? You know, he could have right off the bat said, I am not doing this, I am out of here, and he would have been shot and he wouldn't have done any good, right? But instead, he kind of played the game, and by doing that, he was able to, in all these other ways, just do such a tremendous amount of good. So, like, where do you stand up and say, like, you know, say something really controversial and fight and be passionate about it, perhaps get deplatformed, perhaps lose your ability to share a message, and how do you, like, when do you try to connect with them, understand them, not get completely angry when they say stupid things, so that you may have hope of changing? Like, what's that line and how do you guys walk it?
That's a really hard question to answer. I think that I would have to say that I define that in the moment. I don't think I have an actual strategy for that. I also wanted to add from what we were just talking about, that I try, whenever I'm not absolutely sure that someone is a troll, I try to treat them just like as a person, even if their ideas just sound insane to me. So that's something that I try to do.
I think you can fight and still treat the person respectfully, and you're fighting with facts, and you're fighting, you know, you can be passionate and not, you know what I'm saying? You don't have to insult them and call them names, like the left does. You know, you don't do that. even if some names come to mind.
We all do it sometimes.
No, I think it's a very difficult question. If there's one thing we could take away, it's that there is no clear-cut answer, so there's no quick tips for this. But, you know, sometimes like controversy can really breed followers, but sometimes it's not helpful for explaining ideas and for widening people's horizons. Sometimes you just end up getting a bunch of people where you're preaching to the choir and you just get acolytes who already agree with you. So that's a decision you have to make. Like, why are you doing this? Is it to bring more people over, or is it just to become popularized within a circle where they
And maybe a good rule of thumb is, you know, you're expending your time, which is literally our only currency, right, on it. So it's like, if you're doing it and it's fun and you're like, okay, I'm into this or whatever, like I'm in a good troll fight here, that's different, right? But when it's painful or whatever, we're all independent, sovereign human beings, and you can just be like, I'm disengaging. So I think a rule of thumb that I've tried to develop now is, like, how is this influencing me? Because it's my time and my brand, and so you get to choose, and that's actually quite empowering.
Just real quick, I have to do that all the time, where I'm just like, I do not have the emotional strength to read this stuff about Ross or whatever, or these attacks, I just don't. And I have to budget that. I mean, I just don't have it sometimes.
Sorry, I know you guys want to ask questions. I also want to add on to that you're not under any obligation to give your time and energy to people, so you can cut yourself off from the hate whenever you want.
Mute is an amazing tool on Twitter. You guys should try that. It's not even like blocking, where it's like, I'm making a statement, you cannot tell you. It's just mute them. They don't even know you're not seeing their stuff. Tone, do you have anything to add? We've run out of time, but maybe like a quick question.
Yeah, I know. That's why I want to block you. I didn't do any kind of questions. I'll take 3 seconds to say, please get off Steam. It is such a scam, but I'll end it there. I guess as
a content creator, I make a lot of my money from Steam. So you may think that as a scam it has no future use. As someone who's practically using it and earning a living and able to support my channel because of it, I find it to be a very valuable tool. So maybe
early adopter Ponzi scheme argument.
We'll talk later. I think it's more for Desiree, because you do have a pretty popular YouTube channel. How do you manage your channel between your opinion and the people you interview's opinion? Because that's one of the things that I always deal with. And anytime you bring someone on, because you're so opinionated, just by them being on your channel, you give them credibility. How do you manage that?
Well, I don't think I've ever really thought about managing that, because if I bring someone on my channel, it's because I'm interested in what they have to say, and I assume that my audience can figure out for themselves whether or not they think they're credible. So I always ask people, usually at the end after an interview, I will say, well, is there something you disagree with me on, even if we're talking about something that we do already agree on. So I don't really manage it, but it doesn't intimidate me that someone would come on and speak about something different. It's actually hard to get people who don't agree with you to talk to you. So well, maybe not for you, but for me, it's hard to get people to want to come on and talk about something, because they tend to stick to their own like political sphere. Yeah. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I'll get, well, I know we're low on time.
Patrick, do we have time for...
Quick question.
I want to ask how much you're fighting for freedom. Like, it's easy to fight for freedom if you're a slave, like free me, but if you're a slave owner, it's harder. Like, you don't own slaves, but government made you owning some words combinations that you post. So let's say you are benefiting from your texts or from your books, and some people want to copy it, or they come with similar ideas. So do you want to take that freedom from them? Because as far as I understand, Desiree support this, the government protects your intellectual property. So do you ready to give other people freedom to copy your work?
So if I understood the question correctly, you are asking our positions on copyright. I mean, that's a good one. You know, it's one of those tensions. If you're a content creator, you're obviously like, oh, gee, I really don't want you to plagiarize my shit. I think what I personally, the way I approach it is I think intellectual property laws are pretty ridiculous. I don't think you can really steal an idea. I do think if you take someone else's words without attribution, to circle back to the sort of diplomacy idea, if you just treat people the way you want to be treated, if you heard a good idea somewhere, just say, hey, this person said it. And if you use someone's words online, attribute the quotes. And if you don't, I think, that's a good place to call it out.
It seems like, because when I had my talk on censorship, something like that came up, and I realized that I don't really agree with a lot of people here on this topic, because I do believe in intellectual property rights. I think it's your idea comes from you, and sometimes what you've done is creative and ingenious, and you should be able to profit from that on your own, maybe for a certain number of time. So I'm for intellectual property rights and copyright, and I would maybe when I make something, make it clear what I expect, like under a license, if I wanted someone to be able to use it in a way that I thought was okay.
Well, I think that's the most important part there. Like, I'm against IP in the sense that we have the state involved with this. I believe the reputation system can play a part. If you see someone copying someone without attribution, then you can call them out on that and try to turn the market against them. I think that's fine. I also think that you have the ability, like I don't like IP protecting people and having government rules and all that, but you could have individual contracts. If I write a novel and I write at the start of that novel, if you are reading this book, you are hereby agreeing to this contract that you are not to copy anything, and if people break that, then you have the ability to, to be unhappy about that and to try and fight that with whatever tools you have. But I just don't see IP as being helpful in its current form in society. I see a lot more ideas flourish when people build on other people's things. There's like a fine line between like people posting my videos, and sometimes it gets me more views. It's not clear cut that it's necessarily a bad thing. So it's an interesting question. I think we've run out of time, but huge thank you to our panelists here. It's been really interesting.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Neil, Desiree, and Carla Garrett. Our next speaker.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.